If you've got a budget of £3,000 and you want something sporty, two-seater, roadster with rear-wheel drive, then I'd look no further than these two great cars. In the red corner from Japan is the Mk1 Mazda MX5, or Miata if you're in the States. And in the silver corner from Germany is BMW Z3. In this week's video, I'm going to pitch these, my own cars, against each other to tell you what I think is the best value for money roadster for £3,000. Welcome to Fast and Fun. So neither of these cars offer stupendous performance, but what they do offer is a really usable two-seater open-top sports car with performance that is adequate enough in today's traffic and congested roads. And when the weather turns, gets that bit of sun on your back, the temperatures start rising, what a great time to look at one of these. And if you can pick one of these up for a good price, you maintain it, then actually it will give back in spades. And more importantly, it's likely to lose nothing. And with a bit of luck, you might even make a few pennies to offset some of the running costs. But let's make no bones about it, these are older cars. The Mk1 MX5s now are 25 to 30 year old. The Z3s first came into the country in late 96, early 97. They are nearly 25 years old. So these are older cars that are likely to have higher mileage. But most will have been cherished, and find one that's been garaged and looked after. And you could find, I think you'd struggle to find, better value for your £3,000. People naturally, when they think of budget rear-wheel drive roadsters, always go for the Mk1 MX5. The legendary MX5 built from 89 all the way through to 97 when they moved to the Mark II. And it was at that handover that the Z3 launched with its real range of engines. You see, the Mk1 MX5, you were sort of limited to two four-cylinder engines, a 1.6 and a 1.8, with different various tunes, depending on the lighter 1.6 was a really feisty little four-cylinder, but when the later 1.8 came along, they detuned the late 1.6s, and they're probably best avoided. But go for an early 1.6 or a late 1.8, manual as well, you've got a great car. And with the Z3s, they initially launched it with the 1.9 four-cylinder, and it did receive a few sort of lukewarm reception. But flipping hell, in its 6-7 years in production, the Z3, the range of engines produced were absolutely balmy. From 1.8 and 1.9 four-cylinders all the way through the range to the 3-litre. Plus, they brought out some quirky coupes and Z3 M's as well. But there's almost a car in the Z3 range for any sort of budget or any sort of performance. And these, as I said, were produced all the way through to late 2002. This is one of the very last Z3s. People that buy the Mk1 MX5 and the Z3 won't want it just to drive really, really well. Looks is an important part of any roadster category. And depending on the angle, depending on the day of the week, I flip-flop between which is the best looking car. You've got the very simplistic looks of the Mk1 MX5. These little alloy wheels dwarf with their arches. It's a very simple design with its big smiley face in the front grille. And it's almost a little bit too simple at times, but that gives it the classic look. And it's, of course, it's got the brilliant pop-up headlights. The Z3 is a few years newer, and you can tell that with its style. The alloy wheels just dwarf the little miniature MX5s. The side vents, the long clamshell bonnet, you just sat right on the rear axle in the Z3, and it just looks a more purposeful, angry, more aggressive looking car. What for me is important though is what they're like to drive. So let's take them both out and see which one I think drives the best. The first time you step into a Mk1 MX5, you sense you're dropping back definitely into the 90s, because it's a very basic, bare spec of car. Many didn't come with power steering, many had no electric windows, air conditioning, manual roof, cloth interior. Now, there was various specs that you could get, loads of different special editions of the Mk1, and some of them did come with some of the niceties. This specific one actually has got electric windows, and it's got power assisted steering, and it's also got aircon actually, so it's quite well spec for a Mk1, but just be aware that some of these specs are quite low when looking at a Mk1. But the rest of the cabin itself, it's functional, not luxurious. It's typical 1990s Japanese black plastic. It's been clearly put together well, because there's a few creaks and squeaks, but it's not too bad. But it's not what you call opulent luxury. It's very simple, it's basic, and it's functional. But that really sums up the Mk1 MX5, I think. It's there to be simple, and that has a lot of benefits when it comes to owning one of these that are 30 years old, because it just means there's less technology and things to go wrong. It makes ownership that much more affordable. I'm 6 foot, 16-ish stone, and it's a snug fit, but one that I do fit in. There's a lovely Momo steering wheel, which actually finishes off it quite nice, and the pedals are well positioned, and although there's not loads of room, I'm actually very, very well supported. The Mk1 only came saying that with the two 4-cylinders, the 1.6, 1.8, mine wants a 1.8, and it delivers, or it used to deliver 30 years ago, about 128 brake horsepower. It's not a lot of power, so it's not a quick car. But what it does enable you to do is really rev out the engine and really go through the gears. And what a gearbox. The gear change is absolutely brilliant. In fact, I would argue it's one of the best, if not the best, gear change I've ever had the pleasure of using in my 30 years of driving. It really is an absolute joy. So yes, you haven't got any sort of, it's not a really nice sounding engine. The pull is okay, it will just do, but the gearbox makes it a delight, and the ride quality is actually really, really good. The really thick sidewalls of the tyres, just not what you get in modern day cars or more modern cars, but that results in a more compliant ride and the chassis to die for. Yes, in the dry you're going to struggle to break any sort of traction, but in the wet it's got such a balanced chassis, it's so playful. Biggest concern you've got with the Mark 1 is finding a good one. Yes, they were built in huge numbers, but many of them have gone off the road or they're full of rust. They just eat away from the inside out. Sills, arches, you can't look at an MX5 without getting underneath it. Get under it, have a prod around, see what it's like, and also check the MOT history. When you jump out of the Mark 1 and into the Z3 feels about twice as big as the little diminutive Japanese car. It feels, well, like you're stepping in up a class in regard to quality. The inside of the car is just the typical, what you'd expect, Germanic car. A little bit unfair because obviously it was 7 or 8 years newer than the original Mark 1 MX5, but inside it feels newer than that. The typical layout, it's really well spec'd, it's got the leather seats, the dash just feels a quality, well, not just a step above, to tell you the truth, it's a league above the MX5. It's even got, well, with the leather seats, but it's even got heated seats and traction control, and it's altogether a much more modern feeling car. But the best thing with the Z3 for me is the engine. And it's true, you've got such a huge range of options. This particular one is the 2.2 6-cylinder, and I have to say it sounds phenomenal. Where the MX5's a little bit tinny, nothing to it really. This has got an extra 40 horses, about 170 horsepower, and it feels much more potent, it pulls stronger, it sounds better. It is categorically a better engine. The Z3 is a really nice place to be. And I think if you're cruising along, then it's probably the better option. The big problem with the Z3 that I've got is the chassis and the steering. It just doesn't ride as well. The chassis, it just moves around the road just too much. And that's okay when you're just pootling along at 6 or 7 tenths. But when you want to push on, the car just feels a little bit disjointed. And the steering, it offers no feedback. In fact, I would argue it's all a little bit artificial. You don't really notice it because we as drivers get used to driving a specific car. But it's even more stark, having just jumped out of the Mark 1 into this, how it's very, very false, especially around just ahead of Central. Once you're fully loaded into corner, it starts to feel better. But yeah, the camber of the road, it just doesn't offer you the same sort of feedback as the MX5. And it's such a shame because arguably the Z3 is the better car. And it certainly is with regard to, if this was a competition, a top trumps of numbers, the Z3 would win it hands and shoulders above the MX5. It's got, you could argue, the better badge, the kudos of having a BMW and German car over the Jap. The engine, categorically, it's a better engine. And you've got to say the 2.8 and the 3 litre, if you want more power, they don't come at much more of a premium for the Z3s. But this 2.2 6-cylinder, It sounds better, it goes better. It is categorically a better engine. It'll accelerate quicker, have a higher top speed, and the inside, the specification, it's just a better quality car through and through. Even the boot's better, where the Mk1 MX5's got a spare wheel shoved in the corner. This is more spacious, it's more usable. The problem is with the Z3, it's just the way it drives. If you want a car to drive at 6 or 7 tenths, cruise around in with the roof down during the summer, I'd probably go for the Z3. Because I think it's just, you're getting more for your money. But if you want a driver's car, and you want a car that you want to push to the limit, it's the Mk1 MX5 wins. It's head and shoulders the better driving car compared to the Z3. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, thumbs up, please subscribe, and stay tuned. Another video next week.